Anywhere you'd like to sit. It's good. Bridget, do you want to take a seat? Jennifer, Wolfgang. Oh, there you are.
Yes.
All right.
Go
ahead. We're going to put you on the hotspot. Yes, you. Welcome. Welcome, everyone. My name is Angie Fife. I'm the Executive Director of the ICLEI USA office. Welcome to this session on the digital age, data-driven solutions for a greener future. I want to acknowledge that today at COP is the day of energy, just transition to a fossil-free future, and Indigenous Peoples Day. And so I want to acknowledge that I live in a city called Denver, Colorado, which was originally the home of the Cheyenne, the Ute, and the Arapaho tribes. And so welcome. We're going to start today with a little bit of a scene setting about AI, about data-driven solutions, decision-making, and so on. We'll have a little bit of a debate up here. As my European colleagues like to say, we don't say debate, we just say conversation amongst our distinguished panel. And then we'll hear from each of them individually. So welcome again. We know that we need to act fast. We are running out of time to hit our very ambitious goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius. And we need technology today that will help us to make good decisions for today and tomorrow. We also need to monitor and evaluate our progress. And we do this by collecting data, looking at insights, and sharing those insights with each other. So I'm going to welcome now my colleague, Wolfgang Trubner, the Regional Director for ICLEI Europe.
Thank you, Angie, for the introduction. I think I've just sort of tried to frame a bit the discussion that the talk that we're going to have. So I think we collect a lot of data in this world. And we have satellite data, we have mobile phone data, we have transport data, we have a lot of data available from a lot of sources, but I think we are not yet as good as we could to put the data to really good use. And I think, particularly local governments are often struggling. I mean, there's a lot of monitoring and reporting asks from them, but I think we have not yet managed to really organize this simply and efficiently to also basically ease the burden on the local governments. So and also to use the data in the best possible way. I mean, for example, if we talk about Europe, we have invested billions to put up a lot of satellites, and but we are not getting, the granularity, the data, it's particularly for climate adaptation in this case, to make it really workable, for planning on the local level. So that's also, part and parcel of the cooperation we have entered with Google, because we are working with Google in two different ways. One way is, of course, to say, okay, to look into the quality, the accessibility of data for cities, to say, can we use the data that they have available in a very good way to help cities to ease basically their burden in data collection and so on, and to provide good data for them for planning and monitoring. And then, of course, we have a second level of cooperation, which I also like to mention with the Google Action Fund. We are supporting data-driven projects in cities so that, of course, also we can see that various actors and stakeholders can see basically the value of data to create impact in their work in cities. So I think we have a good panel today. So we will look at both ends of this path or this collaboration, and we are looking forward to an interesting discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wolfgang. And we are also at ICLEI USA very excited to be working with Google on a couple of different projects. Wolfgang mentioned the ICLEI Action Fund, which is activating projects in local communities. We have 3 in the US that we're working on. We also ingest data from Google. We bring in the Environmental Insight Explorer data in transportation and buildings into our software tool, which is called ClearPath. It's available to US cities, counties, and regions for them to model climate strategies. And the EIE data, the environmental insights data, has been quite helpful to accelerate the inventory process and to accelerate action, which is what we're all about. So I'd like to welcome to the podium now, Bridget Gosling.
Thanks so much, Angie. Great to be here with all of you today. I'm Bridget Hoyer Gosling. I lead Google.org's work that's focused on leveraging and using and supporting organizations around the world who are applying data and AI in their work to accelerate progress on big challenges, including all of our work on climate. I'll share a little bit more about some of the efforts that Angie and Wolfgang both mentioned, thinking about how we can really be deploying, at Google, our funding, our technology, and our expertise to support the green transition, the digital transition in cities. So, of course, we know cities must be at the forefront of our efforts on climate. Of course, we've seen this data. You all have probably helped us to find this data, right? 70% of global emissions are coming from cities. And of course, are really at the forefront of climate change vulnerability. And we'll hear a little bit more about that, I'm sure, from some of the folks who are here today. Cities are seeing the impacts already now for their citizens, for their infrastructure, and we need to be thinking about how we can drive some of that resiliency. And in addition, of course, to the ways that we, of course, this week are talking about climate impacts, we know we need to act to get to that 1.5 degrees. There are also tremendous economic impacts that will be seen in cities sooner than later as we think about the potential damage to economic livelihoods. And then also there's huge potential that we've seen, right? Studies are showing that if we are actually able to convert to a lower greenhouse gas emission path, we will start to see we'll see economic benefits for our society. And I think particularly in cities, we will be able to hopefully realize that. So at Google, we really are working hard to build sustainability into everything we do. And of course, we're doing important work in our own operations. We've made a commitment as a company to operate 24/7 carbon-free energy by 2030. We're working with the ecosystem around us to make that possible, of course, not just for us, but for everyone. But as a technology company, we also know that there's a lot more that we can do to accelerate and leverage technology and data, the things that we are good at, the things that we can offer to the ecosystem to do more and to do it more quickly. And so we've set a goal as well to work with individuals, with cities, with our partners to collectively get to a gigaton of reduced carbon emissions annually by 2030. This is quite a bold ambition and one that we frankly can't do alone, right? Literally, but also don't really have all the answers to how we'll get there. And so we are looking for lots of ways to work with partners. And I think cities continue to be a critical piece of that puzzle. And hopefully, the reason that we set all of these ambitious goals is so that we can innovate and find new ways to work together. So as we think about the work that we can do, right, uniquely, and Angie, you mentioned, right, the tool Insight that we've built, Insights Explorer. Governments are, of course, often lacking the data that they need. And even when they have it, it's often relatively inaccessible. It can be quite expensive to do regular updates to that data. This is something that we know cities are struggling with, and we hear it from them. And we believe deeply that this should be more equitable. We have lots of sources, as you said, Wolfgang, for data already that we can be leveraging and creating into insights more efficiently and effectively. So Environmental Insights Explorer is our Google solution for that. It's a flagship solution that we've built for cities and local governments. We launched it over 6 years ago, and it's a free platform that is created specifically to measure emissions, to run analysis and identify strategies. It uses some of our own mapping data and a lot of our AI capabilities to create new data sets and insights in that data sets covering building emissions, transport emissions, and solar rooftop potential. And it's available now in over 40,000 cities around the world. We've been working hard to really scale that up. And again, it has no cost. So please, if you are interested, check it out, see what's happening in your community. It's something that's available for everyone to use. And hopefully we're already seeing it being used, right, across baseline emissions. You mentioned inventories, thinking about developing climate action plans, and ultimately really, informing those policies that we know are so key. I thought I would also just share some of the newer data that we're putting on. So, I mentioned building and rooftop, but also as we think about adaptation and resiliency, the work that we need to do, we need to keep looking for ways that we can bring new data to cities in a timely manner. So extreme heat is something that we've been thinking a lot about. Of course, it's been top of mind, I think, for so many of us over the past couple of years as we see soaring temperatures around the world. And it has real consequences right now in people's lives, the health impacts, and of course, also disproportionately impacts already marginalized groups, the elderly, communities of color around the world. So we now are working on new data sets that can help address this. So one of those is our tree canopy tool. We're using satellite imagery and is enabling to identify gaps in tree coverage and actually do more effective targeting of planting trees and creating green spaces. Obviously, we know the benefits of trees. We can lower temperatures. We can look at ways to actually create new green spaces for our communities. And then we also have some very early work that's happening on cool roofs. So a technology, of course, that we're looking at, as well as a pathway that we could potentially take to try to actually bring down temperatures in cities themselves. So cool roofs, using solutions such as painting a roof white. I've seen walking around here, some really interesting technologies people are using to try to really accelerate that work. This is again using AI and satellite imagery to really map out the solar reflectivity across cities and give folks a better understanding. We're now seeing many more cities around the world who have urban heat officers, right? Chief heat officers, and we're grateful for that. And we are looking for ways to give tools. This last tool is, relatively early. I think we are in about 10 cities right now, really trying to test this out and make sure it's useful. But as you can see, we're just working hard to try and build new data sets, new tools informed by the conversations that we're having with those cities. While we, of course, are, as you acknowledged, really focused on these data elements, and I think, as I said, as a technology company, as a data and AI company, that's what we can do best in this moment. We also know that there are gaps. Subnational governments are providing key leadership in the climate moment right now, but they're not necessarily always able to mobilize finance to act on that action. We were talking about this previously. And so data is really only as great as what you do with it. We know that, putting these maps out, putting EIE out is one piece of the puzzle. But at this critical juncture, we need to be driving toward action, and we need to be looking for partnerships across nonprofits and universities and private sector to really get that acceleration that we're looking for. And that's why we've worked over the past few years on the ICLEI Action Fund. So really putting over $10 million in grant funding across Europe and the US to bridge that funding gap, and importantly, to really foster partnerships across nonprofits, universities, and government actors centered around that data and insights. So how can we look at the same data and make a plan together for how to act on that? It's really a critical piece of the puzzle across urban heat. We're seeing projects around energy consumption and predictions, air quality, vulnerability mapping, home electrification. These are the critical pieces of the puzzle that are going to come together to really get that reduction that we need. And I wanted today to just highlight 4 elements of the projects that I think we've seen together that are, I think, exciting in the ways that this will hopefully drive and perhaps even new approaches across the work. So one is, of course, the focus on data, really looking at that map together, those insights together, of course, building new data sets where we can and continue to contribute those back to the overall city plans. But really creating that data-centered approach can hopefully drive action. The second is, I think all of these projects have done an amazing job at citizen engagement. This is really, of course, so hard. We know that cities are always doing that work, but really thinking about how that data can also unlock new conversations in communities, help provide a better understanding for communities of what's happening in their backyards, and of course, take their input into what's important and how they think that action should be driven. The third piece that's critical, of course, is real city partnership. And one of the things that, I think in our partnership with ICLEI has been so important is really driving that. We see in our work, right, as Google.org is a funder, we fund a lot of nonprofits and universities who are doing amazing work. But without cities and the partnership with cities, that work might just be an interesting project on the sideline. We know that cities have to be at the table to actually take this work forward. And all of these projects, I think, are doing an incredible job of really building those pieces together, creating that kind of space. And then the final thing that I think is really true for most of these is that they really are taking an equity-oriented approach and thinking hard about the holistic kind of climate picture. I think one of the things that's been really front and center at this COP, thinking about the health commitments made, looking at the ways that gender and equity are coming into these conversations, looking at that holistic picture, and data can help us to do that too by marrying up some of these climate insights with other things. Ultimately, everything that we've supported through the fund has really been with an eye toward replicability as well. Hopefully, these are solutions that could ultimately be applicable in other places. And so, of course, the deep partnership with ICLEI and the network that they have provides us one opportunity to do that, but also really encourage folks to check them out. And I'm delighted that we'll get to hear today from some of the organizations who are really using data in their work to do so. So with that, I will wrap and hand over to those who really do the work. And just so, again, thank you so much for sharing this time today.
Thank you so much, Bridget. I'm super excited to see where we're going to go with machine learning and artificial intelligence. We're starting to see in the US these policies, cities putting AI policies in place. That's really interesting to see how they're starting to think about this from public records and transparency sort of framing. So it's going to be interesting. Well, now it's my pleasure to introduce someone who is no stranger to COP, Councillor Susan Aitken from Glasgow, of course, the host of COP26. Welcome to the podium.
Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here this morning with our great friends and partners at ICLEI, who have been an enormous supporter to Glasgow, both in the run-up to and since our COP hosting experience back in 2021. So I'm the city leader of Glasgow, and we were delighted to be one of the cities that benefited from the ICLEI Action Fund, which has helped us to build on work that we had already started, but had a very useful but limited spread across the city, and the ICLEI funding will enable us to really expand that and expand the impact of it. And that's particularly around monitoring air quality. Glasgow is not a city, and any of you who were at COP26 won't need me to tell you this, Glasgow is not a city that suffers from extreme heat, and that's not a challenge that we have. We do have challenges around flooding, and I'll maybe say a little bit about that in a minute, because we've also got some really smart solutions to flooding as well. But we do have, despite having the lowest car ownership of any city in the UK, we have a very car-dominated city centre in particular, but a car-dominated city, mainly people driving into and through the city from our wider metro region. And it is the air quality impacts of that are a serious public health issue. And of course, they're particularly a public health issue for the poorest and most vulnerable citizens, older people in particular, people with respiratory conditions. So air quality has been a big political priority for the administration that I lead. We have implemented in full since June of this year a low emission zone in our city centre. That has been politically challenging, there's no question about it. And any of you who have followed the stories of Mayor Sadiq Khan's efforts to bring in the ultra low emission zone in London might be aware of the kinds of political backlash that we're seeing. I don't think it's unique to the UK. But we had that on a smaller scale in Glasgow as well. But I'm glad to see we did have legal action taken against us, which we up to this point have won comprehensively. So we're absolutely committed, not just to our low emission zone, but tackling air quality more widely as an environmental measure, because it is about reducing emissions, but first and foremost, because it is about public health and social justice. So our hosting of COP put us in contact with the GEM project, Global Environmental Measurement and Monitoring Initiative. I have to check what all these acronyms stand for. And a partnership with Stanford University, which provided air monitoring equipment for all of our primary school roofs in the city. So we had a particular focus on air quality roundabout schools. And that was an absolutely brilliant project, which gave us a huge amount of data that allowed us then to think about how we build on the work that we've already started through the low emission zone. But the support from ICLEI and the Action Fund is allowing us to take that even further to create the GEMA NOAA project, which is the Glasgow Environmental Monitoring of Indoor and Outdoor Air. So using technology and data to take us even further in terms of measuring the quality of air, the health impact of that, and then using that data to help us plan. That's a partnership with the University of Strathclyde, and we've already heard how the partnerships, the town and gown partnerships between city and academia are so important and so central to this. So the expertise at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow, Strathclyde is a global top 100 university for engineering, particularly a technology university for over 150 years now, has allowed us as the city to really benefit from that combined partnership. Our democratic and social justice policy objectives combined with the expertise from the university to make sure that it is effective, that we're using it in the right way. And we're also working with the non-profit sector in our city to try and make sure that not just this data, but other environmental data that we're gathering more widely is able to be accessed and understood and then used by our communities as well. We're the only UK city to be part of the Open Government Partnership. And so we have a commitment not just to making data available, but to making it genuinely accessible and genuinely useful to our citizens and our communities, particularly in a way that can drive equity and social justice, as well as our decarbonisation journey, as well as our ambitions to be net zero by 2030. So that element of it is incredibly important to us, incredibly important to me as a democratically elected politician, that we're not just collecting data that is data for its own sake, that is knowledge for its own sake, but that is actually being used to drive insights and improvements for the lives and the places of the people that I'm elected to represent. And the GEMA NOAA project and the support that we've had from ICLEI and from Google to be able to do that, I think is a really, really good example of that. Because if we do this in isolation, in the end, it isn't going to be effective. It's not actually going to deliver the outcomes that we want. So that's perhaps the key project that I want to talk about today, because it is the one that's most associated with ICLEI. But there are a couple of other areas that I'll maybe just touch on where we're trying to, we either have already successfully used tech and digital and data to tackle climate challenges, and also what we're looking to in the future. So I mentioned flooding, and we have in the north of the city a now 230-year-old canal, the Forth and Clyde Canal, which was at the heart of Glasgow's industrial era. It was one of the pieces of infrastructure that turned us into one of the centres of the Industrial Revolution. But then in the post-industrial era fell into decline. But the Forth and Clyde Canal has a new lease of life now as the heart of a blue-green infrastructure and blue-green public space. But there are or were very serious flooding challenges around that, which meant that the land around about the canal couldn't be developed. So we've used digital solutions and data-driven solutions to put in place, in partnership with the Scottish Canals Body, Europe's first smart canal project, which monitors rain levels, and when the rain level gets above a certain level, literally just drops the level of the canal, so that there's space for more water. It's as simple as that, and that has massively alleviated the flooding risk, and it has allowed us to build homes and new industry on the banks of the canal, and completely revitalised that part of the city which had been neglected for a very long time. And looking to the future, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in AI, but clearly it is something that politicians and communities are trying to get their heads around. And there's a lot of trepidation, a lot of fear about AI, and we have to perhaps plan for a just transition into an AI future as much as we're planning for a just transition into a net zero future. And those perhaps have to go hand in hand. But one of the pieces of work that we're doing is with the Urban Big Data Centre at the University of Glasgow, where we're partnering with university on a funding bid to establish a centre for AI, for research on AI, with a specific intention of supporting Glasgow's 2030 net zero ambitions. So again, trying to bring together that absolutely of-the-minute technology to ensure that we are harnessing it in a way that serves our social purposes, that serves the purposes of society and citizens in Glasgow. As I say, that's just a bid at the moment, so we don't have any outcomes from that yet. But it feels to me that that's the very necessary kind of partnership and the kind of thinking that cities and our partners need to be putting in place. We need to be trying to get ahead of this technology before it gets ahead of us, and having clarity and intentionality about what we want to achieve with it, what outcomes are possible, is absolutely essential. Cities, though, are we are struggling with capacity in a lot of areas just now. We're struggling with financial and human capacity, and therefore the support of corporations like Google and city networks like ICLEI have been absolutely essential and will continue to be absolutely essential in the years ahead. My final point would be, I think that, and this is in no small part thanks to ICLEI, one of the big stories at this COP is that it has been the COP of cities, that cities really for the first time since Paris have been actually in the COP itself. In Glasgow, we made a point of putting cities at the centre of the work that we did as the host city, but we weren't part of the COP itself. We were very much on the sidelines. But I think it didn't go unnoticed that cities did make their collective voices heard, and municipalities, local government made its collective voice heard in Glasgow. And that has resulted in this incredibly strong presence of more than 200 mayors here, particularly in the first couple of days of the COP here in Dubai. And so stories and examples like this of where there is real practical action on the ground delivery of climate solutions, which are being led and driven by local government, considerably more than national government in many, many cases, I think we'll need to take more and more centre stage at COPs as we go to the future. And so thank you again to ICLEI for facilitating this today and for helping cities to be in that position. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Councillor, and thank you for your leadership and for bringing us that inspirational story from Glasgow. Very much appreciated. So we're going to turn to our own digital tools now, and we're going to welcome our next speaker, Hannah Ryan, the Urban Mobility Officer based in Berlin, to the digital stage.
Hi, everybody. I'm just going to share my presentation here. I hope you can hear me well. Okay, no, here we are. Okay, so yeah, good morning to everybody. I'm sitting in Berlin right now, and it's freezing. It's still out. It's still dark out there, but yeah, I can see the weather is way better where you are. So I'm going to present some results of our ICLEI Action Fund project, Pop-Up Republic New Mobility in Berlin. And this project had like the bigger goals of this project were the acceleration of transitional mobility in Berlin, climate protection, healthy air, and the support of immediate implementation of free effective measures, cycling infrastructure, parking management, and speed limit reduction to 30 kilometers per hour. And we had this idea in 2020 when the pandemic started. We saw in Germany that we had first pop-up bike lanes, and we were like, oh wow, this is a great idea, because usually we were talking to municipalities and they were like, yeah, you know, building a cycle lane will take 2 or 5 years, sometimes even 10 years. And then we saw those pop-up bike lanes popping out of the streets within weeks. And we were really like, this is good. Like Berlin did it, everybody else has to do it. And we were talking to different cities in Germany, and they were like, you know, we're not quite sure about the effects on pop-up bike lanes. And they were like pretty, yeah, they didn't really know what to think about it on their like right side, that they weren't quite sure if it's really legit to build them. And that's the reason why we also had a opinion on the opinion on the if they're legit made in this project. But on the other hand, we wanted to create fact-based arguments to support the acceleration of mobility transition. And I will just show one of our test beds. We had like one of the streets where actually a pop-up bike lane came in place, and it's still there. So this is Kantstraße. It's like a really important street in Berlin, and it's 3.6 kilometers long. And it was really dangerous to take your bike there before and bicycle, because you can see there were parking cars on the right-hand side, then there were 2 lanes for the cars and no space for cycling. And what they did is what you can see on the other picture is that they took the parking lane into the middle. They took 1 lane for the driving cars, and then you had a bicycle lane there, which is pretty wide, and it's also sort of protected by the cars, which are still parking there. And we thought, okay, let's see what is the influence of this cycle lane to car traffic, to bike traffic, to air pollution, because that's something the administrations in Germany don't really have the time to do. They do before they do some countings of cars and bikes maybe, but they don't really have the time, and it's not really planned for them to measure how successful those measures are. And what we did is exactly that. So we used data. There is official data at Kantstraße, which is monitoring the car traffic. And we saw, okay, wow, it's the car traffic was decreasing by 22%. And because when we started talking about pop-up bike lanes, a lot of the people were like, okay, there's more air pollution because the traffic is just being in traffic jams, and it's not really like this measure is not really good for the health and for everything. So we're like, okay, minus 22% of the car traffic. And we also looked at other streets, and there was not really a rising amount of cars at the other streets. And we looked at the bicycle traffic, and we saw, okay, people really want to bike there. And we saw an increase of 232% of the bicycle traffic at this lane, because, I mean, you saw the pictures, it was just really dangerous before. So they were happy that they could finally have this bicycle lane there. And we looked also at the nitrogen dioxide exhaust. So nitrogen dioxide is an exhaust which is really coming from diesel engines, from cars. There were some official monitoring stations at this street, but we also measured ourselves. You can see my colleague there on the picture putting up some diffusion tubes for monitoring nitrogen dioxide. And we also saw that the nitrogen dioxide got less, and in the average less than in other streets. It went down to from 2.0 to 7.6 microgram per cubic meter. And that was because there was no traffic jam. There was not more traffic standing in traffic jams. So we communicated those fact-based arguments which are pro-traffic transition in cities. And it really helped, I think, because we didn't directly work together with the city council or the city mayor, but they used those numbers and spreaded them as well. So it helped the idea of having fact-based arguments and having arguments pro traffic transition in cities. And then this project ended last year. But the city actually, or some of the district councillor of Mitte, which is one district in Berlin, came to us and asked us, you know, we have a new cycle path at Müllerstraße. Could you do an evaluation there? And we asked ICLEI and the Google Action Fund, and we were able to extend our work here. And we did another evaluation of this Müllerstraße cycle lane, and we saw that the increase of bicycle traffic was 31%, and the decrease of car traffic was 17% at the same time. But the cars do have the same space still. So we were wondering, why is that? And then we saw, like in whole Berlin, there's a decrease of car traffic, and it's from 14 to 17%. And this is a result which has to make the new mayor thinking, do I want to build roads or bicycle lanes? Because you know, there's not really a need for new roads. There's a need for new bicycle lanes, and we hope that we can convince them to build more infrastructure for bicycle lanes. And yeah, what are the conclusions? And I have to come to an end here already. So good data is key to implement effective measures. We really saw that having those fact-based arguments, having those evaluations of bike lanes, of speed limit reductions really helps the discussion, because especially in Germany right now, traffic transition is not really easy to do. There's a lot of politics under conservative parties who are using traffic transition measures to, like, you know, go against climate adjustments. And we need those arguments. And the evaluation is really, really important. And yeah, I think this is my final slide, and I will come to an end and stop sharing maybe here. And yeah, give the microphone to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you very much. You know, your comments made me think about the fact that we tend to think of data as zeros and ones, right? Things that come to us in little bites like that. But really, data is actions taken by people. And so actions taken by people is what really drove your projects. People saying, we want more bike infrastructure. So congratulations on your
the data was there. It was just not really analyzed. Oh, okay, you can hear me.
We're gonna have you back, Hannah, to talk more in a moment. But first, we have our last presenter. I'd like to welcome to the podium Dr. Jennifer Hirata. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Angie. It's wonderful to support the conversation, intimidating to follow these very impressive projects that are clearly the types of models I think that we're all, working towards, and having that data to support real smart decision-making. I'm from Broward County in Southeast Florida. I think that our efforts really, with regards to data, spanned a number of areas of interest, but we're regularly still struggling. We're trying to constantly update data sets, look at platforms for managing data, trying to improve the visualizations for the ability to provide meaningful communications and support decision-making. But I do want to kind of talk briefly about a variety of the efforts and how we've also really sought to take advantage of new resources within our teams to better support the type of more event-specific occurrences that are taking place that aren't generally captured in the more, kind of annual or quarterly updates of data sets that don't allow us to grasp some of the fine points. But first, I want to begin by acknowledging the longstanding partnership with ICLEI. I think Broward County has been a partner with ICLEI from the very beginning. It's been critical with regards to our own ability to have a knowledge regarding our emissions. Clearly, that is, emphasized for us where we need to place our energies. But it isn't just about the Broward County emissions inventory. We've been working as a region with neighboring counties for 15 years on shared mitigation and adaptation strategies. And since we're all, utilizing the same ICLEI platform for our emissions assessments, we've been able to maintain county-specific emissions inventories, regional inventories that bolster what's happening locally. And that's been very opportune right now because we're in the midst of pursuing, federal grant funding that relies upon these regional inventories and being able to make projections about where we go under the current business, practice, and help prioritize these longer term strategies and really begin to, with a finer point, be more definitive about where we make investments, where it's been a little bit more haphazard to date. So I think it's really working today to start to provide that orientation that we've needed in addition to just kind of general awareness. I want to kind of move though from the emissions discussion to think about some of the spatial data sets that we've used. Being in Florida, we're regularly dealing with extreme flood events. And of course, we're all dealing increasingly with extreme heat events. And it's been really essential as we move forward to think about how we might be able to overlay, investments that deliver these co-benefits and being able to look at flood and heat risk and social vulnerabilities all together to really look to orient investments in a way that will deliver best for our community. That has been involving a lot of localized data collection through, we have typical LiDAR data sets, but we've actually had to move to drone deployment very recently. So we can think about some of these major events. This last year, we had a 26-inch rainfall event that fell within 12 hours. And when these events occur, you can't get out on the ground and navigate. You don't have vehicles that have the clearance to be able to get you in the neighborhood. If we're having storm surge and tidal events, the best that you want is to get your staff out of the area and not, jeopardize staff or infrastructure in the assessment. But immediately after the event occurs and while the condition is still underway, we need to figure out who needs help in the community. So this last year, we were very well positioned by having drones that were available. We were actually able to support the Broward School District, which is the sixth largest in the nation, to go out and conduct an aerial assessment of all the schools so that they could figure out which schools could open in the next day or two. And they certainly didn't have the infrastructure in place to support that type of assessment. That information is increasingly key too, as we look at these intense storm events that are resulting in beach erosion. Trying to get crews on the ground and do these, surveys in a matter of hours after event can be very difficult with access issues. And we may not have post-storm surveys from like NOAA that would allow us to be able to communicate very quickly to the Army Corps or others about the level of impact that we've realized. But with the drones, we're able to manage those assessments much more quickly, bring those into some of the other spatial displays and be able to communicate much more quickly with our leadership about the extent magnitude of impacts post-event. I'd also note that having this type of information also helps to validate a lot of our modeling work. So we have been developing very advanced hydrologic models over the period of the last 15 years. It's just this ongoing process. And what's useful about the model development is Broward County invested in the original models, but FEMA uses our same model, they improve it. The Water Management District uses our same model, they improve it. So we have multiple agencies that are constantly investing in the same tool. All of the work that's being done is compatible because we're utilizing the same data sets in the model calibration and the other improvements, whether it's integration of structures, control gates, monitoring wells, and so forth. But when we run the models in these future conditions assessments, it's been critical to be able to relate that information to actual events that have occurred. And so in particular, with this last 12-inch rainfall event, we were able to make spatial comparisons between that and scenarios that we had run with the modeling, showing that this 1 in 1,000 year storm very much paralleled the modeled predictions for 3 feet of sea level rise, storm surge, 20% rainfall intensification, and groundwater table rise and storm surge. Every single factor that is a compound flood factor that we account for in the modeling, where you would normally say, one might say, well, that doesn't seem realistic. How could we ever expect 5 feet of water at the airport? We released that model data at the time, the very same day that rainfall event occurred. And so the next day we were able, again, with drone imagery, with crowdsourced data collection, where there had been folks on the ground again reporting local flood conditions, bring that in and compare it to the model results and really emphasize the types of conditions that we're preparing for, and that they're not totally abstract. And while we're not planning for a 1 in 1,000 year rainfall event, the conditions that we're planning for in future conditions are really playing out under a different type of a climate condition that's producing the same results. So it helps to provide framing of what we're looking at. We've been able to take a lot of these data sets, bring them into Power BI to help also better display a lot of times for our leadership or the community, some of the ranges, the categorical types of data, grouping economic exposures and so forth, rather than trying to run through spreadsheets and histograms. Sometimes the Power BI tool providing us an opportunity to switch visualizations quite quickly, and then also drill down into the data itself with just kind of a click of a screen. And so we have an innovations group within the Broward County that is doing a lot more with Power BI to help some of our communications there. I guess the last thing that I'd like to just touch on are some of the challenges. One is data cost. There are so many types of data that we would like to have, and we have to, and frankly, the price tag for a lot of what we want is exorbitant. And it's very challenging because of the need of not just having the data once. We want it updated regularly and always. And, purchasing a data set that shows rooftop solar canopies, because we can't get that information from our energy provider. And so we need, these visualizations. Well, we want to be able to monitor that regularly. And we want to know how our property assessed clean energy financing is supporting, more of these projects, but we're not able to access the data unless we do these spatial analyses. And so we want to have an ability to pull that data, view it much more quickly than we currently do have, and at an affordable price. And then I would just say too, that sometimes we've invested a lot in terms of that platform for sharing information. It might take us 5 more years till we get the next data set, and now the platform is kind of out of date. And so you're dealing with the fresh data, old platform, and really trying to judge again, well, do you put it into that rickety platform, or do you start all over again, which sometimes it feels like. And again, with limited resources, I think there's so much that we all want to be doing, and having to be selective when you have so many priorities. I know it's the battle that we all deal with. Having access to data really does support the efficiency. We need the efficiencies and the smart decision making, but the management of the data itself is quite an exercise. So, but it's great to have the partners here that provide us the good quality data that is able to be utilized in these efforts. Thank you.
All right. Well, I know our audience probably has at least 100 questions for Jennifer. So let's bring all of our panelists back up if we could. We have 10 minutes. We can take some audience questions, or I know Wolfgang always has a great question to ask. So is there anyone in the audience that would like to pose a question to any of our panelists? Yep. Thank you. We'll bring a microphone around because we're recording and we want to be sure that folks can hear it. Yeah. Wolfgang, maybe you can come up as well, and you can help to facilitate the responses here. Great. Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay, great. My name is Emily. I'm an undergraduate student at Duke University in North Carolina. This talk was fantastic. I obviously don't have a lot of experience working in city governments or anything like that. But I guess a little background on myself is that this past summer I worked in the National Weather Service in Raleigh, North Carolina, and we did a lot of local partner meetings, and I was specifically looking at like heat tools. So it was really great to hear all of your perspectives and how you're collaborating with different organizations. So I have a lot of different questions, but I guess I'll start with how has the like partnership with local universities, so I guess it's specifically to you, but how has the partnership with local universities maybe alleviated the burden of people power? Because I imagine that your city council and your city workers are pretty, strained on resources. So how has the partnership with local governments alleviated that burden, especially when there's, like computer science experts, science communication experts at universities that can be leveraged for that power? And how do you think that could be a model for other cities that maybe are strained at capacity?
I mean, we couldn't have done it without the universities, and if it had happened, it would have happened on a much smaller scale, and it would have been much more difficult to replicate and roll out across the city. So I genuinely think, though, that really wouldn't have happened, the projects that we're talking about with the kind of impact that they've had without the collaboration with the universities. That town and gown partnership has been absolutely essential on both sides. So the universities have provided us with the capacity and the expertise, and we, the city, have provided the universities with the purpose and the outcomes and the practical application of research. So I think that partnership it's pivotal. And as I say, I really don't think that we would have made anything like the progress that we would have had if we'd had to do it on our own as a city.
Well, thank you very much. I want to congratulate both ICLEI Europe and ICLEI US for organizing this very important discussion. My first point is that I'm not seeing here ICLEI Africa. I wish they were here, because to my view, climate change is a global problem, and we need to looking at it in a global way. And what I see, not only for the lack of ICLEI Africa or ICLEI Asia or ICLEI Latin America, reflects not only on the panel, but also on the reality on the ground. For example, when the lady, sorry if I have to call you lady, from Google, she said, well, you can check your city. Of course, I just went there. And of course, there is nothing about my city, meaning that the Global South is lagging behind in this debate about data. And data is of a paramount importance for any meaningful decision-making. So if we want to accomplish the SDGs, we cannot have this divide, North and South. So I think that something needs to be done about that, starting from the ICLEI reorganization. We need to be included. I think inclusion is very important. Actually, last week, with Megan, we contacted a lady from Google at Sharm el-Sheikh, and we had a meeting where we had discussed the possibility of using one of your tools to monitor transport in Mozambique, and for that matter, in my city, the city of Quelimane. But then after this early discussion, we exchanged numbers and emails. Then I sent 3 emails, like I never got feedback, which to me, it was like Africa is not priority yet to Google, but also looks like to ICLEI too. So I wanted to see what can we do so that we can move together, because I think having data, and I'm saying this because the first time I was elected as a mayor of my city, I felt like a pilot during a cyclone without any instrument to use. It's like, I was there, I had to take decisions, I had no data. It's like, how am I going to take this decision without any meaningful data? So I had to guess. And sometimes I made big mistakes. Other times, I was lucky enough that things worked out. But I want to reinforce the importance of data and, of course, of the digital data in this age we have. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you so much. Bridget, yes, would you like to respond? Great.
Sure. No, I mean, I couldn't agree more, and I deeply feel what the feedback that you're offering. So one of the things that is true for the models that we're building with Environmental Insights Explorer for Google is that they are reliant on some underlying data sets that we also lack, right? Collectively, globally, in every part of the world. We're working on new AI models that can actually interpolate from fewer data points, which I think will help to close those gaps more effectively. But it is the case that because we continue to have a divide, we have less information. So we are working also with partners, for example, with WRI on extreme heat around the world, collectively on that issue where we don't actually have a lot of information, and we can maybe start from a different place too. Looking at new AI models, looking at geospatial imagery, looking at sensors, and working hand in hand with their city and urban offices kind of around the global south. So that's one piece of the puzzle, right? We need to build these additional pictures, and then those layers can all kind of continue to aggregate. We also, I think, are finding some good approaches in using centralized modeling tools. So one of the things that we've invested a lot of energy into in the last few years is flood forecasting, not yet capable in all urban environments, because as you both described, urban flooding is quite a challenge. But riverine flooding, which affects so many livelihoods around the world and is, of course, devastatingly getting worse in the last couple of years, we now have a tool called Flood Hub that allows for up to 7-day early warning alerts on flooding that is deployed across 80 countries, obviously most of those, including many across the global south. And we've been partnering also with organizations to provide cash to affected communities in advance, to pilot what could we do actually to save lives in advance of that. That's actually work that's happening in Mozambique as well. So happy to share more there. What's interesting and important, I think, about that tool just on the data front, and I know I'm giving a sort of long response, but I think it's important that we're looking at different approaches, right? So one of the things there is that we're able to use data that we've collected and have maybe from stream gauges in one place, build a model that can then use less information in a new place. And I think with new AI approaches, that's actually going to be something that we all need. I mean, we talked about the accelerant. I think you made such great points there. We need to be building more of those tools too that can be more transported so that we're not kind of in a mode where we're constantly lagging, but can actually start to close that gap more quickly.
Thank you so much. So come to time, but the speakers will be here for a little bit. Feel free to approach them afterwards. Mayor, I will make a commitment to come to the ICLEI World Congress the week of the 19th of June, 2024, and do a session that includes ICLEI Africa, our folks in SAMS and Southeast Asia, and let's engage Google and other speakers, and let's come together and have that conversation. We'd love to have you involved in it. So excellent. All right. We hope the rest of you will come to the ICLEI World Congress next June as well. I want to thank our speakers. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you all for coming. Enjoy the rest of your day.